I'm Margaret Chen, 68, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought my memory issues were just normal aging. That's what my family kept telling me anyway. Mom, you're getting confused again, my daughter Lisa would say with that patronizing smile. Maybe. It's time we handle your finances. I believed them. I trusted them. I even signed papers I thought were to help manage my medications. But when I found the real estate listing for my house, the one I bought with my late husband's life insurance, money, posted online with a sold sign, everything became crystal clear. My memory wasn't failing. My family was stealing from me. And the worst part? They'd been planning this for months, convinced I was too confused to fight back. Well, they're about to learn just how sharp Margaret Chen really is. Like and subscribe if you've ever had family underestimate you, because this story is just getting started. Lisa arrived at my front door Tuesday morning with that smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. In her manicured hands, she clutched a leather planner filled with what she claimed were important medical appointments I'd apparently forgotten about again. "Mom, you missed your cardiology follow-up yesterday," she said, brushing past me into my own living room. "Dr. Patterson called me directly because he's so concerned about your memory." I stood there in my favorite blue sweater, the one Harold always said brought out my eyes, feeling suddenly small in my own home. "I don't remember scheduling any appointment, Lisa. My heart is fine." "That's exactly what we're worried about, Mom." She settled onto my couch like she owned it, spreading out papers across my coffee table. "You're forgetting important things. Last week you called me 3 times asking what day it was." Had I? The days did seem to blur together sometimes, especially since Harold passed 2 years ago. The silence in this house could be overwhelming, but 3 times? That seemed excessive, even for me. "I've scheduled you with a neurologist too," Lisa continued, not looking up from her planner. "Dr. Martinez comes highly recommended. We need to rule out any cognitive decline." The word hung in the air like a threat. Cognitive decline. I'd watched my mother disappear into Alzheimer's 20 years ago, and the fear of following her path had haunted me ever since. Was that what was happening? Were these normal senior moments actually something more sinister? "I also think we should discuss your finances," Lisa said, her voice taking on that patient tone you'd use with a child. "I found 3 unpaid bills on your kitchen counter yesterday. The electric company, your property taxes, and the homeowner's insurance. You could lose the house, Mom." My stomach dropped. I was always meticulous about bills. Harold used to joke that I paid them the day they arrived. But lately, everything felt scattered. Mail piled up, appointments slipped my mind. And yes, sometimes I did wonder what day it was. "I can help you," Lisa offered, pulling out a thick document. "This power of attorney form would let me handle the important stuff while you focus on staying healthy. Think of it as insurance, just in case." I stared at the legal papers, the words swimming together in blocks of intimidating text. "I don't. No, honey. Your father and I always managed our own affairs." "Dad's gone, Mom." Her voice turned sharp, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that. But you're alone now and you need help. We all do sometimes." She was right, of course. Harold had handled most of our finances, and since his death, I'd struggled to understand investment statements and tax documents. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe this confusion really was something serious. "Just think about it," Lisa said, gathering her papers. "I love you too much to watch you struggle like this. We all do. Michael, Sarah, even little Emma asks why. Grandma seems so sad all the time." After she left, I sat in Harold's old recliner, surrounded by the silence that had become my constant companion. On the table lay Lisa's carefully organized schedule of medical appointments and that power of attorney document. But something nagged at me. When exactly had I called her 3 times in one day? And those unpaid bills, I distinctly remembered writing checks for them just last week. I walked to my desk drawer where I kept my checkbook register. There it was, in my own handwriting. Electric bill, property taxes, insurance, all paid and mailed. So why was Lisa telling me they were overdue? Michael showed up the next evening. In a brand new BMW, Sarah climbing out of the passenger seat, wearing a diamond bracelet that caught the porch light like scattered stars. My son had always been the charmer, the one who could talk his way into or out of anything. But tonight, something felt different about his smile. "Mom," He wrapped me in one of his signature bear hugs, the kind that used to make everything feel safe when he was little. "You look fantastic. Lisa said you haven't been feeling well?" "I feel fine," I said, though I noticed how quickly Sarah looked away when I smiled at her. "When did you get the new car?" "Oh, this old thing?" Michael laughed, but it sounded forced. "Business has been really good lately. That consulting firm I told you about finally took off." I remembered that consulting firm. I'd given him $40,000 to start it 18 months ago, after his web design business failed, which came after the failed restaurant, which followed the failed real estate venture. Each time, Michael had presented detailed business plans and projected profits. Each time, I'd written the check because I believed in my son. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, though I couldn't help noticing Sarah's designer handbag and the new watch on Michael's wrist. Consulting firms typically took years to become profitable, especially in a competitive market like Seattle. We settled in the living room, and Michael immediately launched into what felt like a rehearsed speech about my concerning behavior. Lately, how I'd seemed confused during our last phone call, how I'd forgotten Emma's soccer game, how I'd supposedly told him the same story 3 times during his last visit. "I never forgot Emma's game," I said firmly. "I was there. I cheered when she scored that goal in the second half." Michael and Sarah exchanged a look. Quick, but I caught it. "Mom, that was last season. Emma's playing basketball now. Soccer ended in November." My heart stuttered. Was he right? The seasons did blur together sometimes, and sports schedules were never my strong suit. But I had such a clear memory of that goal, of Emma's face lighting up when she spotted me in the stands. "The point is," Sarah said, speaking for the first time since arriving, "we're all worried about you living alone. This house is so big, and with the stairs." "I've lived in this house for 15 years, I said. "Harold and I chose it specifically because it was our forever home. But Dad's not here anymore," Michael said gently, "and maintaining a place this size, handling all the finances, the upkeep, it's a lot for anyone, especially someone your age, someone my age." As if 68 meant I was already 1 foot in the grave. I thought about my neighbor Eleanor, who was 72 and still climbed mountains on weekends. Age was just a number, but my children seemed determined to make it feel like a limitation. "Lisa mentioned you've been having trouble with bills," Sarah added, "and forgetting appointments. These things happen, Margaret. There's no shame in accepting help." There was something in her tone, a patronizing sweetness that made my skin crawl. This was the same woman who'd borrowed $5,000 from me last Christmas to pay off credit card debt, promising to pay it back by spring. Spring had come and gone without a word about repayment. "I manage my finances just fine," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, doubt crept in. Had I been forgetting things? The evidence seemed to be mounting. Unpaid bills, missed appointments, repeated stories. Maybe I was losing my grip on reality. "We know you do your best," Michael said, but Lisa showed me some concerning bank statements. Duplicate payments, missed automatic transfers, checks written to the wrong companies, small mistakes that could become big problems. Bank statements? When had Lisa gotten access to my bank statements? I kept my financial information private, locked in my filing cabinet. Harold had always insisted on that. Never give anyone unnecessary access to your personal affairs. "I think you should consider Lisa's suggestion about the power of attorney," Michael continued. "Just as a safety net. She's good with numbers, she's organized, and she cares about your well-being." "We all do," Sarah added, though her eyes remained fixed on her phone screen. "We just want what's best for you." After they left, I stood in my driveway watching the BMW's taillights disappear around the corner. The house felt impossibly quiet. Behind me, but for the first time in months, the silence felt ominous rather than peaceful. I walked back inside and headed straight to my filing cabinet. The lock was intact, but something felt wrong. The folders weren't in their usual order. My meticulously organized system had been disturbed. Someone had been through my files, but who had access to my house? Only Lisa had a spare key, and she'd only used it for emergencies. At least, that's what I thought. I pulled out my most recent bank statement, the one Michael claimed showed concerning activity. Every transaction looked normal to me. Grocery stores, pharmacy, utility companies. No duplicate payments, no obvious errors. Either Michael was lying, or someone was giving him false information about my accounts. The question was, Why? I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house settling seemed amplified. Every shadow looked suspicious. At 2 in the morning, I gave up on rest and padded to the kitchen for chamomile tea, Harold's old remedy for my occasional insomnia. That's when I saw them. A stack of papers on my kitchen counter that definitely hadn't been there when I went to bed. My hands trembled as I picked up the documents, recognizing the letterhead of Patterson, Williams and Associates, the law firm that had handled Harold's estate. The top document was labeled Durable Power of Attorney, and my signature was clearly visible at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. According to the date, I'd signed it 3 days ago, but I had no memory of visiting any lawyer's office, no recollection of signing anything legal. My signature looked authentic. The slightly shaky M in Margaret, the way I always looped the C in Chen. But how could I have signed something I didn't remember? Was my memory really that far gone? I flipped through the other pages, my heart sinking with each revelation. Lisa was granted complete authority over my financial affairs, medical decisions, and property. She could sell my house, access my bank accounts, even make decisions about my healthcare without my consent. These documents essentially made me powerless in my own life. There was also a letter from Dr. Patterson, not the cardiologist Michael had mentioned, but apparently a psychiatrist I'd supposedly been seeing. The letter detailed my progressive cognitive decline and recommended immediate family intervention. It described episodes of confusion, memory loss, and poor judgment that painted me as incompetent to manage my own affairs. But I'd never seen a psychiatrist. I'd never even heard of this Dr. Patterson until now. The final document made my blood run cold. It was a preliminary agreement with Sunset Manor, a nursing home facility, reserving a room for Margaret Chen, pending family placement. The deposit had already been paid, $15,000 from my own checking account, according to the attached bank withdrawal slip. I sank into my kitchen chair, the papers scattered across the table like evidence of a crime. Someone was systematically dismantling my life, using my own money and forged documents to do it. But the signatures looked real. The legal language seemed authentic, and the official seals appeared genuine. Was I losing my mind? Or was someone incredibly clever trying to make me think I was? I studied the power of attorney more closely. The witness signature belonged to someone named Janet Morrison. I'd never heard the name. The notary was Maria Santos, also unfamiliar. If I'd really signed this document, wouldn't I remember the people who witnessed it? The attorney's office address was downtown, only 20 minutes away. I'd driven past the building countless times, but never been inside. Yet according to these papers, I'd spent an afternoon there 3 days ago, signing away my independence. Pulled out my appointment calendar, the one I'd kept religiously since Harold's death to help organize my days. 3 days ago, I'd noted grocery shopping 10 a.m. and lunch with Eleanor 1 p.m. No mention of any legal appointment. Eleanor and I had indeed had lunch that day. She'd driven us to that new Vietnamese restaurant downtown. We'd spent 3 hours together, talking and laughing like we always did. There was no way I could have fit in a visit to a lawyer's office. But if I hadn't signed these documents, how did they have my authentic signature? The handwriting analysis would surely prove they were real, unless I grabbed a magnifying glass from Harold's old desk and examined the signature more carefully. The ink looked different from the rest of the document, slightly bluer, as if it had been added later. And there was something else. Tiny perforations around the edges of the signature area, so small they were almost invisible. Someone had cut my signature from another document and pasted it onto these papers. It was sophisticated forgery, but it was still forgery. The question remained, who had access to documents with my signature? Who could have orchestrated something this elaborate? I thought about Lisa's visits over the past few months, how she'd always insisted on helping me organize my paperwork, how she'd photographed important documents for backup purposes, how she'd encouraged me to sign various forms for insurance updates and medical authorizations. My own daughter had been collecting samples of my signature, building a case for my incompetence and planning my imprisonment in a nursing home. And she'd been using my own money to pay for it all. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just theft. It was the systematic destruction of my autonomy, my dignity, my entire life, and they'd almost convinced me I was crazy enough to deserve it. But I wasn't crazy. I was sharper at 68 than most people half my age. And now I had proof that someone was trying to steal everything Harold and I had worked for. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I gathered the forged documents and locked them in Harold's old safe, the one Lisa didn't know about. Tomorrow, I would start fighting back. But tonight, I finally felt clear-headed for the first time in months, because now I knew the enemy wasn't my failing memory. It was my own family. Lisa called the next morning, her voice tight with what she probably thought sounded like concern. "Mom, we need to have a family meeting today. Michael and I have been talking, and we're really worried about you." "What kind of meeting?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Just come to Michael's house around 2. Sarah's making her famous lasagna, and we can all sit down and discuss your situation, my situation, as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected." I arrived at Michael's suburban home to find more people than expected. Lisa and Michael sat on the main couch with Sarah, but there was also a man I didn't recognize, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that screamed authority. "Mom, this is Dr. Patterson," Lisa said, rising to give me one of her fake embraces. "He's a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in cognitive decline. We thought it would be helpful to have his professional opinion." Dr. Patterson stood and extended his hand with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Chen, I've heard so much about you. Your family is very concerned about some changes they've observed in your behavior." I shook his hand, noting how his eyes seemed to catalog every detail of my appearance, looking for signs of the incompetence he'd already diagnosed in his fraudulent letter. "Doctor, I wasn't aware I was being evaluated today." "Oh, this isn't formal," he said smoothly. "Just a friendly conversation to help your family understand what you might be experiencing." We sat around Michael's living room like we were conducting a board meeting about my future. The coffee table held a manila folder thick with papers, medical, forms, legal documents, and what looked like financial statements. On the wall hung our family photo from last Christmas, all of us smiling together in matching red sweaters. Looking at it now felt like staring at evidence of a lie. "Mom," Michael began, "we found some troubling things when we checked on your house yesterday. Bills scattered everywhere, checkbooks with incorrect entries, medications mixed up in your pill organizer." "I never gave you permission to go through my house," I said firmly. "You gave me a key for emergencies," Lisa replied. "And forgetting to pay bills is an emergency. The electric company called me directly because they couldn't reach you. That was impossible. I'd paid my electric bill 2 weeks ago, and I always answered my phone." "When did they supposedly call you?" "Tuesday morning. They said your phone was disconnected, so they used me as the emergency contact. I pulled out my cell phone and showed them the screen. My phone works fine. Call the electric company right now and ask them about my account status." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Dr. Patterson leaned forward, his voice taking on that condescending tone medical professionals use when they think you're mentally impaired. "Mrs. Chen, it's common for people experiencing cognitive decline to become defensive and paranoid. You might feel like people are lying to you or conspiring against you, but that's just your brain's way of trying to make sense of confusing situations." "Are you suggesting I'm paranoid for questioning claims that can be easily verified?" I asked. "I'm suggesting that your family's concerns come from a place of love, not deception. They've noticed changes in your behavior, missed appointments, repeated conversations. These are classic early signs of dementia." Sarah, who'd been quietly taking notes throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. "Margaret, we found your checkbook register yesterday. You'd written the same check 3 times, for different amounts, to the same company." She slid a photocopied page across the coffee table. It showed entries in handwriting that looked like mine, with dates and amounts that made no sense. Check. Chomko 47, written to Pacific Gas and Electric for $127.50 on Monday, then again on Tuesday for $98.32, then again on Wednesday for $156.89. Except I only wrote 1 check to the gas company this month, and I'd never make such sloppy entries in my register. This was another forgery, more sophisticated than the power of attorney, but still fake. "That's not my handwriting," I said quietly. "Mom, please." Lisa's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine emotion. "We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help. Dr. Patterson thinks you'd benefit from a more structured environment where professionals can monitor your medications and daily activities. You mean a nursing home? Assisted living, Michael corrected. Sunset Manor has beautiful facilities and excellent care. You'd have your own apartment, social activities, and medical support whenever you need it, and you'd have access to my house and bank accounts while I'm safely tucked away. The room went quiet, except for the ticking of Michael's grandfather clock. Dr. Patterson cleared his throat and opened his leather portfolio. Mrs. Chen, I've reviewed your recent medical history and spoken with your family about their observations. Based on what I've seen, I believe you're experiencing mild cognitive impairment that could progress to more serious dementia. I'd like to recommend a comprehensive evaluation and consideration of supervised care. You've never examined me, I said. You've never run any tests, asked me any questions, or observed my behavior in any clinical setting. How can you make a diagnosis based on hearsay from people who stand to benefit financially from my incapacitation? Dr. Patterson's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something calculating underneath. Your family has provided extensive documentation of concerning behaviors. Sometimes the people closest to us see changes we can't see ourselves. I looked around the room at these people who claimed to love me. My daughter with her fake tears, my son with his expensive watch, my daughter-in-law with her designer notebook, and this doctor who'd already decided I was incompetent before meeting me. I think I understand what's happening here, I said, standing to leave. But I want you all to understand something too. I'm not the confused old woman you think I am. I'm not signing any more documents, I'm not moving to any facility, and I'm not giving anyone power of attorney over my life. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be, Lisa said, her voice taking on a harder edge. Harder for who? I asked. For you? For your brother? Or for the doctor who's being paid to rubber stamp your lies? I walked toward the door, but Michael stepped in front of me. You can't drive home like this. You're clearly agitated and confused. Move away from the door, Michael. Let me call Lisa to drive you. Move away from the door, or I'll call the police and tell them my son is holding me against my will. He stepped aside, but I could feel all their eyes on me as I left. In my car, my hand shook as I started the engine. They'd been so confident, so prepared with their fake documents and paid expert. They'd expected me to collapse under the weight of their evidence and agree to my own imprisonment. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated Margaret Chen, and now I knew exactly what I was up against. That evening, I sat in Harold's study surrounded by the memories we'd built together over 35 years of marriage. His engineering textbooks still lined the shelves, and his reading glasses lay folded on the desk, exactly where he'd left them the night before his heart attack. Sometimes I could still smell his aftershave in this room, still hear his gentle laugh when I'd struggle with our taxes each April. Harold would know what to do about Lisa and Michael. He'd always been the practical one, the problem solver who could see through manipulation and find solutions where I saw only chaos. But Harold was gone, and I was facing the biggest challenge of my life alone. I pulled out the manila folder where I kept all our important documents, birth certificates, marriage license, property deeds, and most importantly, Harold's life insurance policy. The memory of that terrible day 2 years ago was still crystal clear, despite what my family claimed about my failing mind. Harold had collapsed in this very room while working on our monthly budget. The paramedics tried everything, but his heart had simply given out at 65, just 3 months before his planned retirement. The grief had been overwhelming, but even in my darkest moments, I'd remained sharp enough to handle the practical matters that death requires. The life insurance payout had been substantial. Harold had been meticulous about protecting our future. $500,000, enough to pay off our mortgage completely and secure my retirement. With Harold's pension and my own Social Security, plus the investments we'd carefully built over decades of modest living, I was more financially secure than I'd ever been. That's when I decided to buy this house. Our previous home held too many memories of Harold's presence, and I needed a fresh start somewhere he'd never lived. This place had felt perfect, a cozy craftsman in a quiet neighborhood, with a garden where I could grow the vegetables Harold had always loved. I'd paid cash for the house, using $300,000 of the insurance money. The remaining 200,000 sat in conservative investments, generating enough income to supplement my other retirement funds. I'd never needed financial help from anyone, least of all my children. But apparently, my financial independence was exactly what my family found threatening. I opened Harold's desk drawer and found the letter he'd written me just before his death. Not because he knew he was dying, but because he'd always been the type to plan ahead. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper in his careful engineer's handwriting. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're facing life without me. I know how scary that must feel, but I need you to remember something important. You are the strongest person I've ever known. You raised our children while working full-time, managed our household finances better than any professional, and never backed down from a challenge in your life. Don't let anyone convince you that my absence makes you weak or incapable. You have everything you need to live independently and happily. Trust your instincts, protect what we built together, and never let anyone take advantage of your generous heart. I love you forever, Harold. Tears blurred my vision as I reread his words. Harold had known me better than anyone, and he'd seen strength where I sometimes saw only vulnerability. He'd also seen my generous heart, the part of me that had loaned Michael money for his failed businesses, that had helped Lisa through her divorce, that had always put family needs before my own. But generosity shouldn't be confused with gullibility, and love shouldn't mean accepting abuse. I thought about all the money I'd given my children over the years. Michael's restaurant venture, $40,000. Lisa's credit card debt after her divorce, $15,000. Sarah's emergency loan last Christmas, $5,000. Michael's consulting firm startup, another $40,000. Not to mention smaller amounts for car repairs, children's activities, and countless other temporary needs that were never repaid. I'd given them over $100,000 of my own money, willingly and without expecting repayment, because I loved them. And now they were trying to steal the rest by having me declared incompetent. The cruelest part was how they'd used my grief against me. In the months after Harold's death, I had been confused and overwhelmed. Learning to live alone after 35 years of partnership was the hardest thing I'd ever done. There were days when I forgot to eat, nights when I called Lisa just to hear another human voice, moments when the silence in this house felt suffocating. My children had seen my vulnerability and decided it was permanent incapacity. They'd mistaken temporary grief for permanent cognitive decline, and now they were using that misunderstanding to justify theft and imprisonment. But Harold's letter reminded me of who I really was underneath the widow's grief. I was the woman who'd balanced a family budget on a teacher's salary while Harold was still in graduate school. I was the woman who'd negotiated with contractors, managed investments, and handled every detail of Harold's funeral arrangements with calm efficiency. I was Margaret Chen, and I was nobody's victim. I pulled out a legal pad and began making a list of everything I knew for certain. The forged power of attorney documents, the fake medical evaluation, the manipulated checkbook entries, the lies about unpaid bills and missed appointments, the mysterious bank statements Michael claimed to have seen. Someone with access to my house, my mail, and my personal information was systematically building a case for my incompetence. Someone was working with Dr. Patterson to create false medical records. Someone was preparing to have me committed to a nursing home while they took control of my assets. The question was whether Lisa and Michael were smart enough to orchestrate this alone, or if they had help from someone with legal expertise. Either way, I needed to build my own case, one based on truth instead of fabrication. Harold's voice seemed to whisper in my memory, "Trust your instincts. Protect what we built together." Tomorrow, I would start fighting back, but tonight, I would remember that I was stronger than my grief, smarter than my children assumed, and far more dangerous than any of them realized. After all, I'd learned from the best. Harold had always said that the quiet ones were the most formidable opponents because no one saw them coming. The next morning, I decided to do something I'd never done before: snoop through Lisa's belongings. She'd left her purse in my kitchen during yesterday's ambush, and something had been nagging at me about her overly rehearsed concern for my welfare. If my own daughter was plotting against me, I needed to know exactly what I was facing. I felt guilty rifling through her leather handbag. A mother shouldn't violate her child's privacy, even when that child was violating her entire life. But guilt was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Inside, beneath the usual clutter of receipts and cosmetics, I found a folder marked Mom's Care Plan. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a collection of documents that made my blood run cold. The first item was a glossy brochure for Sunset Manor, the same facility mentioned in the forged documents I'd found. But this wasn't the generic marketing material you'd pick up at a health fair. This was a personalized packet with my name already filled in on the admission forms. Room 237 was highlighted in yellow marker, with a note in Lisa's handwriting. Garden view, wheelchair accessible, close to nursing station. They'd already selected my room. They'd planned my imprisonment down to the specific bed where I'd spend my final years. The estimated monthly cost was staggering, $4,800 for basics. Care, plus additional fees for medications, activities, and medical services. The financial projection showed my assets being depleted within 6 years, assuming I lived that long. But there was another notation in the margin. House sale proceeds could extend care to 10+ years. They weren't just planning to warehouse me. They were planning to sell my home to pay for it. I flipped through more pages, finding floor plans of the facility, activity schedules, and meal menus. Lisa had done extensive research, visiting multiple times according to the appointment cards tucked into the folder. She'd toured the memory care unit, discussed security protocols, and even inquired about visiting restrictions. The most chilling document was a comparison chart of different nursing homes with ratings for family involvement policies, patient advocacy limitations, and medication compliance programs. Lisa had been shopping for a facility that would give her maximum control while minimizing my ability to cause problems. But the real smoking gun was at the bottom of the folder. A printed email exchange between Lisa and someone named D. Morrison, with the subject line, Mom's Situation, Legal Timeline. The emails were brief but damning. D. Morrison, power of attorney documents ready for signature. Need medical evaluation completed before proceeding with placement. Timeline critical due to property sale opportunity. Lisa, Dr. P confirms he can complete evaluation this week. Mom becoming suspicious but still manageable. Michael handling financial documentation. Can we expedite court approval? D. Morrison, Judge Harrison is family-friendly and available next month. Suggest full medical workup to strengthen case. Remember, she cannot have independent legal representation once papers are filed. I had to read that last line twice. They were planning to have me declared incompetent before I could hire my own lawyer. This wasn't just theft. It was a complete legal kidnapping, orchestrated by people who knew exactly how to exploit the system designed to protect vulnerable seniors. The dates on the emails showed this conspiracy had been in motion for months, long before I'd shown any signs of the confusion they claimed to be concerned about. They'd been planning my downfall while I was still grieving Harold's death, still trusting my family to support me through the hardest period of my life. I photographed every document with my phone, my anger growing with each page, but mixed with the rage was something else, relief. For weeks I'd been questioning my own sanity, wondering if my children might be right about my declining capabilities. Now I had proof that their concerns were manufactured, their evidence fabricated, their motives purely financial. The nursing home brochure included testimonials from satisfied families, describing how much better their loved ones were doing in supervised care. Mom seems so much happier now that she doesn't have to worry about managing her own life, read one quote. We wish we'd made this decision sooner. I wondered how many of those testimonials came from children who'd manipulated their parents into facilities for financial gain. How many elderly people were sitting in rooms like 237 right now, confused about how they'd lost control of their lives, wondering if they really were as incompetent as their families claimed. The thought made me sick, but it also strengthened my resolve. I wouldn't just be fighting for my own freedom. I'd be fighting for every senior citizen who'd been betrayed by the people they trusted most. I put everything back in Lisa's purse exactly as I'd found it, but I kept the photos as evidence. She'd be back soon to retrieve her bag, probably with some excuse about needing to check on my well-being again. When she arrived an hour later, I was ready for her. I forgot my purse yesterday, she said, not meeting my eyes. How are you feeling? Today, Mom? You seemed pretty upset when you left Michael's house. I'm feeling very clear-headed, actually, I replied. Clearer than I've felt in months. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, but I stopped her with a question. Lisa, have you ever been to Sunset Manor? Her face went pale, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to get caught sneaking cookies before dinner. Why would you ask that? Just curious. Michael mentioned it yesterday, and I was wondering if you'd researched it for me. I might have picked up some information, just in case, if you ever needed that kind of care. That's very thoughtful of you, I said. I'm sure you picked room 237 with the garden view because you know how much I love flowers. Color drained completely from her face. She knew she'd been caught, but she couldn't figure out how. I let her wonder, let her fear grow, let her realize that her supposedly confused mother was sharper than she'd assumed. I have to go, she stammered, practically running for her car. After she left, I sat in my kitchen feeling a mixture of triumph and heartbreak. I'd caught my daughter red-handed in a conspiracy to steal my life, but the victory felt hollow. This was still my child, the baby I'd nursed through fevers and celebrated through graduations. How had we gotten to this place where she saw me? As an obstacle to be removed rather than a mother to be loved? But sentiment wouldn't save me from room 237. Only action would do that. I picked up my phone and dialed information, asking for the number of every attorney in town who specialized in elder law. It was time to find out just how family-friendly Judge Harrison really was, and whether Lisa's legal timeline could be disrupted by an angry mother who refused to go quietly. The war for my freedom was about to begin. I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone, but after months of isolation, I'd almost forgotten what real friendship felt like. Eleanor Hoffman had been my closest friend for over 20 years, ever since we'd met at a community college ceramics class. While my family had been systematically undermining my confidence, Eleanor had been living her life with the same independence and sharp wit that had always characterized her. I found her address book buried in my desk drawer, underneath bank statements I now suspected had been tampered with. Eleanor's number was written in Harold's careful handwriting. He'd always been the one to update our phone lists, and seeing his notes again brought both comfort and determination. Margaret, Eleanor's voice was warm and surprised when she answered. I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up, dear? Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, I said. When we had lunch last week, did I seem confused to you? Did I repeat myself or forget things we'd discussed? Confused? Heavens, no. You were sharp, as ever, complaining about that new Vietnamese restaurant's overpriced spring rolls and telling me about your neighbor's ridiculous garden gnome collection. Why would you ask such a thing? Relief flooded through me. My family has been telling me I've been showing signs of dementia. They claim I've been forgetting appointments, repeating stories, acting confused about basic things. Eleanor's voice turned sharp. That's absolute nonsense. Margaret, you're one of the most mentally acute people I know. Just last month you helped me figure out that investment scam my nephew was trying to get me involved in. You saw right through those complicated financial documents that had me completely baffled. I remembered that afternoon clearly. Eleanor's nephew had presented her with what looked like a legitimate investment opportunity, but I'd spotted several red flags in the paperwork that suggested it was a Ponzi scheme. We'd spent hours going through the documents together, and I'd helped her avoid losing her retirement savings. Eleanor, I need your help with something, and it might be dangerous for you to get involved. Dangerous how? Are you in some kind of trouble? I explained everything. The forged documents, the nursing home plans, the fake medical evaluations, the conspiracy involving my own children. Eleanor listened without interruption, occasionally making soft sounds of disgust or disbelief. Those ungrateful little vultures, she said when I finished. After everything you've done for them over the years. Remember when Lisa's husband left her? You paid for her lawyer, helped with her mortgage, took care of Emma for months while she got back on her feet. And Michael, how many businesses have you funded for that boy? Too many to count, I admitted. And now they want to steal everything you and Harold worked for. Well, they picked the wrong woman to mess with. What do you need me to do? I need a witness to my mental state, someone who can testify that I'm competent and capable. But more than that, I need help finding a lawyer who isn't part of their network. I know just the person, Eleanor said immediately. My son David is an attorney, elder law and estate planning. He's honest, brilliant, and he absolutely despises people who exploit seniors. He helped me when my sister's stepchildren tried to contest her will. Would he be willing to see me today? Let me call him right now. Can you meet us at my house? In an hour. An hour later, I sat in Eleanor's cozy living room across from a man who looked like he could be Harold's younger brother, tall, thoughtful, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. David Chen was no relation to me, despite sharing my married name, but he had the same careful way of listening that Harold had always possessed. "Mrs. Chen," he said after I'd explained my situation, "what you're describing is unfortunately more common than most people realize. Adult children who see their aging parents as walking bank accounts often use the guardianship system to gain control of assets. Is it legal what they're doing? Parts of it are, if they can prove you're incompetent. The forged documents are definitely illegal, and the fake medical evaluation could constitute fraud. But the real problem is that once someone files for guardianship, the burden shifts to you to prove you're competent. And if they've already convinced a judge that you need protection, that becomes very difficult." David pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes. "Tell me about your daily life. Do you drive? Manage your own finances? Take care of your home? Make your own medical decisions?" "I do all of those things," I said. "I've been living independently since Harold died, paying my bills on time, maintaining my house, staying socially active. The only confusion I've experienced has been about things my family claimed happened that I don't remember. And now I know why." "We need to act quickly," David said. "If they're planning to file guardianship papers next month, we need to get ahead of them. I'd like to arrange for an independent psychological evaluation, one that you initiate rather than them. We'll also need to secure your financial records and maybe consider changing your locks." "Changing my locks?" "If Lisa has been accessing your house without permission, we need to stop that immediately. She's been building a case against you using evidence gathered from illegal searches of your home." Eleanor leaned forward. "What about the doctor who wrote that fake evaluation? Shouldn't he be reported?" "Absolutely," David said. "Medical fraud is a serious crime, especially when it's used to exploit elderly patients. I'll contact the state medical board and the district attorney's office." I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had people on my side who believed me, who saw through my family's manipulation, who had the knowledge and resources to fight back. "There's one more thing," David said. "You mentioned that Lisa has been acting as your emergency contact with various companies. We need to change all of that immediately. She's probably been intercepting communications and creating false documentation about missed payments and disconnected services." "How do I know who to trust?" I asked. "If my own children can lie to me this convincingly, how do I know you're not just another person trying to take advantage of me?" David smiled. "That's exactly the kind of healthy skepticism that proves you're thinking clearly. Here's what I suggest. Take time to verify everything I've told you. Call the State Bar Association to check my credentials. Ask Eleanor about my character. Get a second opinion from another attorney. A competent person researches major decisions, and an incompetent person signs whatever is put in front of them." He was right. My family had been pressuring me to sign documents immediately, claiming urgent deadlines and emergencies. A trustworthy advisor would encourage me to take my time and verify information independently. "I'll pay for a locksmith to come today," Eleanor offered. "And I'll stay with you tonight if you're worried about them trying to enter your house." "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering. We're friends, Margaret. Real friends. Protect each other from predators, even when those predators happen to be family." As we made plans for the next steps, I realized something important had shifted. For months, I'd been fighting a defensive battle, constantly questioning my own perceptions and capabilities. Now, I was ready to go on the offensive. Lisa and Michael thought they were dealing with a confused old woman who could be easily manipulated. They were about to discover they'd picked a fight with Margaret Chen, and Margaret Chen had allies they didn't know about. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, I believed I could win it. The next morning, Eleanor and I walked into First National Bank like two women on a mission, which, in fact, we were. I'd been banking there for over 15 years, and I knew most of the staff by name. But today, I needed more than friendly customer service. I needed evidence. David had advised me to request a complete audit of my accounts for the past 6 months, along with copies of any forms or authorizations that had been submitted with my signature. If Lisa had been manipulating my finances, there would be a paper trail. Mrs. Chen. Janet Sullivan, the assistant manager, greeted me with her usual warm smile. How nice to see you. What can we help you with today? Janet, I need to speak with you privately about some concerns regarding my accounts. I believe someone may have been accessing them without proper authorization. Her expression immediately turned serious. Of course. Let's go to my office right away. In the privacy of Janet's small office, I explained my suspicions about Lisa's financial manipulation. Janet listened carefully, occasionally typing notes into her computer. Mrs. Chen, I have to tell you that your daughter has been in here quite frequently over the past few months, Janet said. She's always very concerned about your well-being, asking about your account activity and whether you've been having any problems managing your finances. What kind of problems? She mentioned that you'd been calling her about missed payments and overdraft concerns. She seemed worried that you might be developing some memory issues. Eleanor and I exchanged glances. Janet, I've never had an overdraft in my life, and I've never called Lisa about financial problems. What exactly did she tell you? Janet pulled up my account history on her computer. Let me check. She said you'd called her 3 times in 1 week about a payment to Pacific Gas and Electric that you couldn't remember making. She was concerned that you might be getting confused about your bills. I've never called anyone about Pacific Gas and Electric. I pay that bill automatically through online banking, and I review every transaction carefully. But Mrs. Chen, Janet said, looking puzzled, you canceled the automatic payment 3 months ago. You came in personally to fill out the cancellation form. My heart stopped. I absolutely did not cancel any automatic payments. I would never do that. It's too easy to miss due dates without automation. Janet turned her computer screen toward us. There in the system was a cancellation form dated 3 months ago with my signature at the bottom. But I had no memory of visiting the bank that day, no recollection of canceling anything. Janet, I need you to pull the security footage from that day, I said. I want to see who actually came in to sign that form. I'm not sure we can. Janet, Eleanor interrupted. My friend is telling you that someone forged her signature on a bank document. That's a federal crime. I think you need to treat this as a fraud investigation. Janet's demeanor shifted immediately. You're absolutely right. Let me get the branch manager involved. This is definitely beyond my authority. 20 minutes later, we sat in a conference room with branch manager Robert Hayes, security supervisor Maria Santos, and a thick folder of documents from my accounts. The atmosphere was tense, professional, and increasingly alarming as the evidence mounted. Mrs. Chen, Robert said, I'm going to be very direct with you. Based on what we're seeing here, it appears that someone has been systematically manipulating your accounts for months. He spread out several forms across the table. These are all signed with your name, but if you're telling us you didn't authorize them, then we're looking at sophisticated fraud. The documents were devastating. In addition to the canceled automatic payments, someone had changed my mailing address for statements to a P.O. box I'd never heard of, added Lisa as an authorized representative on my accounts, set up several new savings accounts with electronic transfers that moved money away from my checking, modified my contact information so the bank would call Lisa instead of me for any issues. The address change is particularly concerning, Maria Santos said. It was submitted 6 weeks ago with a signature that looks authentic, but it redirected all your bank statements to Box 247 at a postal facility downtown. I never authorized any of this, I said firmly, and I certainly never gave Lisa permission to act on my behalf. Robert pulled up my signature card on his computer and compared it to the fraudulent forms. The signatures are very close, but there are subtle differences. The pressure is inconsistent, and the formation of certain letters varies from your established pattern. Eleanor leaned forward. What does that mean in practical terms? It means someone has been practicing Mrs. Chen's signature and using it to commit bank fraud, Maria said. This is a federal crime, and we're required to report it to the authorities. But there's something else, Robert continued. Your daughter has been in here regularly, asking detailed questions about your account balances, transaction history, and financial behavior. She's never accessed the accounts directly, but she's been gathering information that she shouldn't have access to. What kind of information? I asked. Account balances, investment values, details about your pension deposits, and Social Security payments. She claimed you'd asked her to help monitor your finances because of memory concerns. And our staff believed they were helping a worried daughter care for her mother. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. Lisa hadn't just been stealing from me. She'd been using my bank's own staff as unwitting accomplices in her scheme. How much money has been moved out of my primary accounts? I asked. Robert consulted his computer. Over the past 6 months, approximately $127,000 has been transferred to various accounts through these unauthorized transactions. Most of it went to the new savings accounts that were set up, but there have also been several large withdrawals and transfers to external accounts. $127,000. More than a quarter of my liquid assets, stolen gradually so I wouldn't notice the pattern. My legs felt weak as the full scope of the theft became clear. Can you track where the external transfers went? Eleanor asked. Some of them, Maria said. Several went to accounts belonging to Michael Chen and Sarah Chen. Others went to companies that appear to be business entities, possibly related to your son's consulting firm. They'd been funding Michael's business ventures with my stolen money while simultaneously building a case for my incompetence. The audacity was breathtaking. What can we do to stop this? I asked. First, we're freezing all the accounts immediately, Robert said. No one will be able to access them except you in person with proper identification. We're also reversing all the unauthorized changes to your contact information and account settings. Second, Maria added, we're filing a formal fraud report with the FBI and the State Attorney General's office. This is organized financial exploitation of an elderly person, which carries serious federal penalties. And third, Robert said, we're going to help you gather evidence for any legal action you decide to take. Every transaction, every form, every interaction with bank staff is documented and admissible in court. As we left the bank 3 hours later, I carried a thick envelope of evidence that would either save my freedom or send my children to prison, probably both. Eleanor drove us to a nearby coffee shop where we sat in silence for several minutes, processing what we'd learned. $127,000, I finally said. They stole enough money to buy a house. And we're just getting started, Eleanor replied. If you hadn't caught them, they would have taken everything. I thought about Lisa's expensive jewelry, Michael's new BMW, Sarah's designer handbags. I'd been wondering how they could afford such luxuries on their modest incomes. Now I knew. They were living off my stolen money while planning to warehouse me in a nursing home. Eleanor, I said, I need you to do something for me. Anything. If something happens to me before this is resolved, if I have an accident or suddenly become ill or mysteriously develop real cognitive problems, I need you to promise me you'll keep fighting. Don't let them win. Nothing's going to happen to you, Eleanor said firmly. You're going to beat them, and you're going to make sure they never do this to anyone else. She was right. This wasn't just about my money or my freedom anymore. This was about justice for every elderly person who'd been betrayed by their own family, and I was just getting started. Back at my house, David Chen arrived with a laptop and the kind of focused intensity that reminded me of Harold when he was solving a particularly complex engineering problem. We'd changed the locks that morning, and I felt safer in my own home than I had in months. Mrs. Chen, I need to ask you about your email and online accounts, David said, setting up his computer. On my kitchen table. If your family has been intercepting your mail and bank statements, they may have also compromised your digital communications. I felt embarrassed, admitting how little I knew about technology. Harold always handled the computer stuff. Since he died, I've barely used email except to stay in touch with a few old friends. That's actually good news, David said. It means there's less for them to have interfered with. Do you remember your email password? I did. Barely. Harold had set up the account years ago with a password I'd never changed. Harold Margaret, 1987. The year we bought our first house together. David helped me log in, and what we found there made my blood boil. My inbox was nearly empty, but the deleted items folder told a different story. Hundreds of emails had been systematically removed, correspondence from my bank, my investment company, my insurance providers, even messages from Eleanor that I'd never seen. Someone has been accessing your email regularly and deleting anything. Important, David said grimly. Look at the login history. He showed me a log of access times and locations. While most logins came from my home computer, there were dozens of entries from other IP addresses around the city, including several from what appeared to be Lisa's neighborhood. She's been reading your email for months, David said. That's how she knew about bank communications, insurance updates, and probably how she coordinated her story with various service providers. But the real treasure trove was in my sent folder. David found messages I didn't remember sending, replies to bank inquiries confirming address changes, responses to medical offices canceling appointments, and most damning of all, an email to Dr. Patterson requesting a psychiatric evaluation. I never sent this, I said, staring at the screen. The email was dated 3 weeks ago and appeared to be from me, asking Dr. Patterson to assess my mental state because I was concerned about memory problems and confusion. The writing style is wrong, Eleanor observed, reading over my shoulder. Margaret, you would never use phrases like cognitive decline concerns or family intervention necessity. This sounds like it was written by someone trying to sound medical. David saved copies of everything to his laptop. This is evidence of identity theft and fraud. Whoever wrote these emails was impersonating you to create a false paper trail supporting their competency claims. Can you trace who actually sent them? Not definitively, but I can tell you they were sent from a different device than your usual emails. The metadata shows they came from a smartphone rather than your home computer. While David worked on my email forensics, I remembered something that had been bothering me. There's another computer in Harold's study that I never use. Lisa was very interested in it during her last visit, asking if I'd been having trouble with technology. We moved to Harold's study, where his old desktop computer sat exactly as he'd left it. David powered it up and began exploring the files. Mrs. Chen, this computer has remote access software installed on it, he said after a few minutes. Someone could control this machine from anywhere in the world if they had the right credentials. What does that mean? It means someone could log into your email, your bank accounts, any online services you use, all while making it look like the activity was coming from your home computer. Eleanor sank into Harold's old chair. They've been inside her house electronically, even when they weren't here physically. David continued digging through the computer's activity logs. Look at this. The remote access was used heavily over the past 3 months, always during hours when you weren't home. Someone was timing their activities for when you were out grocery, shopping, or at medical appointments. But how would they get the access credentials? Someone with physical access to this computer could have installed the software and set up the remote connection. All they'd need is a few minutes alone in this room. I thought about all the times Lisa had visited, how she'd always offered to help with Harold's computer, how she'd encouraged me to leave it running so she could update the software while I was busy with other things. David found something else, a folder labeled Mom's Documents that I'd never created. Inside were scanned copies of my driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, and passport. Everything someone would need to commit identity theft. They've been planning this for a long time, David said. This isn't impulsive theft. This is a carefully orchestrated campaign to assume control of your identity and assets. But the most disturbing discovery was a series of draft emails that had never been sent. They were written as if they came from me, reaching out to various nursing homes, requesting information about admission procedures and payment options. The drafts included detailed medical histories I'd never provided and descriptions of cognitive problems I'd never experienced. They were going to send these emails to build a case for immediate placement, David explained. It would look like you were voluntarily seeking nursing home care because you recognized your own declining capabilities. Eleanor was furious. It's like they were writing Margaret's obituary while she was still alive. They weren't just stealing her money. They were stealing her entire identity, her autonomy, her right to make her own decisions. There's more, David said, opening another folder. Look at this. The folder contained financial projections showing my assets being liquidated over time to pay for nursing home care. But there were also calculations for a different scenario. One, where my house was sold immediately and the proceeds invested in higher yield accounts controlled by a family trust. The trust documents were already drafted, with Lisa and Michael as trustees and me as the beneficiary. It would give them complete control over my money while providing them with substantial management fees for their services. They weren't planning to put you in a nursing home to protect you, David said. They were planning to use the nursing home as a way to gain legal control of your assets. Once you were declared incompetent and institutionalized, they could liquidate everything and manage the money themselves. I felt sick. This wasn't just theft. It was a complete erasure of my personhood. They'd planned to make me disappear legally while keeping my money very much alive in their own accounts. Can we use this as evidence? I asked. Absolutely. This computer is a goldmine of evidence proving premeditation, identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. But we need to preserve it properly so it's admissible in court. David began creating forensic copies of the hard drive while I sat in stunned silence. My own children had turned my home into a crime scene, my computer into a weapon against me, my trust into a tool for my own destruction. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated their mother's ability to fight back. Harold always said that the most dangerous opponent was the one who had nothing left to lose. Well, they'd taken almost everything from me. Now it was time to see what Margaret Chen could do when she had nothing left to lose and everything left to fight for. David obtained my medical records through a legal request that couldn't be ignored or manipulated. When we met in his office the next afternoon to review them, I was prepared for bad news, but the reality was worse than I'd imagined. Mrs. Chen, according to these records, "You've been seeing Dr. Patterson for 6 months," David said, spreading the files across his desk. The notes describe a progressive decline in cognitive function, increasing confusion, and several episodes of dangerous behavior. "I've never met this Dr. Patterson in my life," I said firmly. "I would remember seeing a psychiatrist. The records say otherwise. Look at this." He showed me detailed session notes describing our supposed conversations. Dr. Patterson had documented my paranoid delusions about family members, my inability to manage finances, and my dangerous insistence on living alone despite obvious incapacity. The notes were incredibly detailed and completely fictional. They described conversations we'd never had about problems I'd never experienced. According to Dr. Patterson's files, I'd confessed to forgetting to turn off the stove multiple times, getting lost driving to familiar places, and becoming irrationally angry when family members tried to help me. "This is elaborate medical fraud," David said. "Dr. Patterson has created an entire fictional treatment history to support your family's guardianship petition." Eleanor, who'd come with me for moral support, was reading the psychological evaluation report. "Margaret, listen to this. Patient presents with significant memory impairment, poor judgment, and inability to understand the consequences of her decisions. She is hostile to family intervention and lacks insight into her declining capabilities. Immediate supervised care is recommended to prevent self-harm or financial exploitation." "How can he write this about someone he's never examined?" I asked. "Because he's being paid to write it," David replied grimly. "This isn't medicine. It's a legal weapon disguised as health care." David had also obtained Dr. Patterson's billing records through a subpoena. The payments for my supposed treatment hadn't come from my insurance or my own accounts. They'd been paid directly by Lisa in cash, with no paper trail except the receipts David had forced the doctor to produce. "Your daughter paid him $12,000 over 6 months to create this fictional medical history," David explained. "That's not payment for treatment. That's payment for fraud." But the most damning evidence was what David found when he investigated Dr. Patterson's background. The man had a history of complaints with the state medical board, mostly related to questionable competency evaluations in guardianship cases. He'd been sanctioned twice for providing biased testimony that favored family members seeking control over elderly relatives. "He's essentially a medical prostitute," David said bluntly. "He sells diagnoses to adult children who want to steal from their parents." I felt violated in a way that went beyond the financial theft. Dr. Patterson had created a false medical identity for me, documenting mental illness I didn't have, describing behaviors I'd never exhibited, and recommending treatments I didn't need. Anyone reading his reports would see me as a dangerous, delusional old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life. "What can we do about this?" Eleanor asked. "We're going to destroy his credibility," David said. I'm filing complaints with the medical board, the district attorney's office, and the federal authorities. Medical fraud is a felony, especially when it's used to exploit elderly patients. But David had an even better idea. Mrs. Chen, I want you to confront Dr. Patterson directly. I'll arrange a meeting where you can ask him about his treatment of you, and we'll record the entire conversation. Is that legal? Washington is a one-party consent state, which means you can record conversations you're part of without the other person's permission. If Dr. Patterson admits to writing false reports or taking money from your family, we'll have him confessing to crimes on tape. The meeting was arranged for the next day at Dr. Patterson's office. I was nervous but determined as Eleanor and I sat in his waiting room, the tiny recording device David had given me hidden in my purse. Dr. Patterson was exactly what I'd expected, a smooth, professional man in his 50s who probably thought elderly women were easy targets. When he called me into his office, his demeanor was condescending and overly familiar. "Mrs. Chen, how wonderful to see you again," he said, extending his hand. "How have you been feeling since our last session?" "Actually, Dr. Patterson, I'm confused about something," I said, shaking his hand and activating the recording device. "I don't remember our last session. In fact, I don't remember ever meeting you before today." His smile faltered slightly. "Mrs. Chen, memory problems are exactly what we've been discussing. It's completely normal for patients with your condition to forget our appointments." "What condition is that?" "Your cognitive decline, the dementia symptoms we've been monitoring. Your family is very concerned about your welfare." "My family told you I have dementia?" "Well, they described certain behaviors and episodes that suggested cognitive impairment. As a professional, I was able to recognize the patterns and provide an appropriate diagnosis. So you diagnosed me based on what my family told you, not on your own examination." Dr. Patterson realized he was walking into a trap, but his arrogance wouldn't let him stop talking. "Mrs. Chen, I understand that patients sometimes resist accepting their diagnosis. It's a common form of denial in cases like yours." "Cases like mine?" "Elderly patients whose families are trying to help them transition to appropriate care. Your daughter Lisa is particularly concerned about your safety living alone." "How much did Lisa pay you to write those reports about me?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He leaned back in his chair, his professional mask slipping completely. "I don't know what you're implying," he said carefully. "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly, how much money did my daughter pay you to diagnose me with dementia?" "Mrs. Chen, I think this conversation has become inappropriate. Perhaps you should discuss these concerns with your Dr. Morrison will spend several hours with you, conducting cognitive tests, reviewing your life history, and assessing your ability to make informed decisions about your own welfare," David explained. "The results will be filed with the court before your family even knows we're taking legal action." That evening, as I prepared for the evaluation, Eleanor helped me organize my thoughts and memories. We went through photo albums, financial documents, and correspondence to refresh my recollection of important dates and details. "Remember, Margaret, this isn't about being perfect," Eleanor said. "It's about demonstrating that you're capable of understanding information, weighing options, and making reasonable decisions about your own life. What if I forget something during the test?" "Then you forget something. Competent people forget things all the time. The question isn't whether you have perfect memory, it's whether you have sufficient capacity to manage your own affairs." The next morning, I met Dr. Morrison at her office for what would prove to be one of the most important conversations of my life. She was a warm, professional woman in her 40s who immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Chen, I understand you've requested this evaluation to document your mental capacity. Can you tell me why you felt this was necessary?" I explained the entire situation. My family's manipulation, the forged documents, the theft, the conspiracy to have me declared incompetent. Dr. Morrison listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting specific details. The cognitive testing was extensive, but not difficult. Memory exercises, problem-solving scenarios, financial calculations, and reasoning assessments. I found myself relaxing, as I realized I was performing well on every task. "Let's talk about your daily life," Dr. Morrison said. "Walk me through a typical day, from when you wake up until you go to bed." I described my routines, Morning exercises, reading the newspaper, managing household tasks, cooking meals, maintaining my garden, staying in touch with friends like Eleanor. It was the life of an active, independent senior citizen, not someone who needed supervised care. What about your finances? How do you handle bill paying, banking, and investment decisions? I pulled out my checkbook register and bank statements, showing her my meticulous record keeping and explaining my investment strategy. Dr. Morrison seemed impressed by my organization and understanding of my financial situation. Mrs. Chen, based on everything we've discussed and the tests you've completed, I see no evidence of cognitive impairment that would affect your ability to make informed decisions about your welfare, she said finally. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is sound, and your judgment appears to be completely intact. What about the reports from Dr. Patterson? Based on my examination, Dr. Patterson's conclusions are completely inconsistent with your actual mental state. Either he never properly evaluated you, or he deliberately falsified his findings. Dr. Morrison's report would be filed with the court that afternoon, providing official documentation of my competency. But David had prepared additional surprises for my family. We're serving the restraining orders tomorrow morning, he told me that evening. Lisa and Michael will be legally prohibited from contacting you or accessing your property until the court hearing next week. How will they react? Probably with shock and anger. They've been so confident in their plan that they won't expect this level of resistance. David methodically walked the court through our discoveries. The forged power of attorney documents with signatures cut and pasted from other papers. The fraudulent bank forms that had redirected my statements and transferred my money. The fake medical evaluation written by a doctor who'd taken cash payments from Lisa. Your Honor, David said, Mrs. Chen's family didn't seek guardianship because she was incompetent. They sought to have her declared incompetent so they could steal her assets without legal consequences. He introduced the bank records showing $127,000 in unauthorized transfers, the computer forensics proving electronic identity theft, and the recorded conversation with Dr. Patterson essentially admitting to medical fraud. And finally, Your Honor, we have evidence that the petitioners had already selected and paid for Mrs. Chen's placement in a nursing home facility before any medical evaluation was conducted. This wasn't about care. It was about removing Mrs. Chen from her own life so they could control her money. When it was their turn, Lisa and Michael's attorney tried desperately to salvage their case. He called Lisa to testify about my supposed episodes of confusion and dangerous behavior. Mrs. Patterson, he began, please describe your mother's condition over the past 6 months. Lisa took the witness stand with obvious reluctance. She looked older than her 42 years, stress and guilt etched in the lines around her eyes. My mother has been forgetting things, Lisa said quietly. Important appointments, bill payments, conversations we've had. She seemed confused about basic daily activities. Can you give the court specific examples? David had prepared me for this moment. Lisa began reciting her litany of false accusations, missed doctor appointments, unpaid bills, repeated phone calls, dangerous driving incidents. Mrs. Patterson, David said when his turn came for cross-examination, you testified that your mother missed several medical appointments. Do you have documentation of these missed appointments? The doctor's offices told me she'd missed them. Which doctor's offices? Can you provide names and phone numbers so the court can verify these claims? Lisa fumbled for an answer. I don't remember the specific names. You don't remember the names of the doctors whose appointments your mother supposedly missed? It was several different offices. Mrs. Patterson, isn't it true that you fabricated these missed appointments to build a case for your mother's incompetence? No, that's not true. David pulled out my appointment calendar. Your Honor, Mrs. Chen has maintained meticulous records of her medical appointments. Every appointment she scheduled, she attended. There are no missed appointments documented anywhere. He continued methodically destroying Lisa's testimony, revealing contradictions and lies with surgical precision. The unpaid bills that I'd actually paid on time. The confused phone calls that had never happened. The dangerous driving incidents that had no police reports or witnesses. Mrs. Patterson, you have access to your mother's house, don't you? She gave me a key for emergencies. And you've used that key to enter her house when she wasn't home? Sometimes to check on things. To check on things? Or to plant forged documents and gather information for identity theft? Bradley Morrison objected, but the damage was done. Lisa looked guilty and defensive, caught in her lies by her own contradictions. Michael's testimony was even worse. Under David's cross-examination, he admitted to receiving large cash transfers from accounts connected to my name, but claimed they were legitimate business loans. Mr. Chen, do you have any documentation of these alleged loans, promissory notes, payment schedules, interest agreements? They were informal family arrangements. Informal arrangements? You received over $60,000 from your supposedly incompetent mother, but you have no documentation proving these were legitimate loans? She wanted to help my business, the same business that failed 6 months ago? The same business whose debts were paid with money stolen from your mother's bank accounts? Michael's face went red with anger and embarrassment. He'd expected to paint me as a confused old woman who needed protection. Instead, he looked like exactly what he was, a failed businessman who'd stolen from his mother to fund his fantasies. The final blow came when Judge Harrison reviewed Dr. Patterson's medical records and compared them to my actual appearance in court. Miss Lisa's been living paycheck to paycheck since her divorce, David said. She earns decent money as a marketing manager, but after child support, alimony, and her mortgage, she has almost nothing left. She saw your assets as her retirement plan. The investigators had found Lisa's personal journal during a search of her home, and David shared some relevant excerpts with my permission. Reading my daughter's private thoughts was painful, but it provided insight into her mindset during the conspiracy. Mom has more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes, Lisa had written. She's living alone in that big house, barely spending anything, while I'm struggling to give Emma the life she deserves. It's not fair that Mom gets to be comfortable while her own granddaughter has to worry about money for college. Another entry was more calculating. Michael says the nursing home plan could work if we can prove Mom is incompetent. Dr. Patterson thinks he can make it happen for the right price. If we can get legal control, we could invest the money better and make it last longer. Mom would be taken care of, and we could finally stop worrying about our financial problems. The journal revealed that Lisa had genuinely convinced herself she was acting in my best interests. She'd rationalized the theft as financial planning, the fraud as protective intervention, the imprisonment as necessary care. In her mind, she wasn't stealing from her mother. She was managing resources for the good of the whole family. It's a common psychological pattern, David explained. Adult children who exploit their parents often develop elaborate justifications for their behavior. They convince themselves they're being helpful rather than harmful. But the most disturbing revelation came from Michael's business records. The FBI had found evidence that he'd been planning to expand his criminal activities using my identity and assets as collateral for even larger fraudulent schemes. He was going to mortgage your house to fund a fake cryptocurrency venture, David said. The business plan projected raising $10 million from investors for a blockchain technology that didn't exist. Michael had already created marketing materials featuring my house as collateral for the investment opportunity. If his guardianship scheme had succeeded, he would have used my property to defraud dozens of additional victims, leaving me responsible for millions in debt while he disappeared with the money. Mrs. Chen, your children weren't just stealing from you, David said grimly. They were planning to use your identity to commit crimes that would have destroyed dozens of other families. The scope of their planned criminality was breathtaking. They'd seen my competency hearing not as an end goal, but as the first step toward much larger fraudulent enterprises. My nursing home placement would have been just the beginning of a criminal career funded by my assets and reputation. What happens to them now? I asked. The criminal charges are extensive. Michael faces federal fraud charges, conspiracy, identity theft, and elder abuse. If convicted, he's looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Sarah could face charges as an accessory, though her lawyers are negotiating a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Michael. And Lisa? Lisa's charges are more complex because of her role in the medical fraud. She faces state charges for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy, plus federal charges related to the banking crimes. Her attorney is also trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutors want prison time. I sat in David's office processing the magnitude of my children's criminal behavior. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd betrayed their own moral compass, their professional ethics, and their responsibilities as parents and citizens. David, I need to ask you something difficult, I said finally. Is there any way to minimize their sentences? I know what they did was wrong, but they're still my children. David looked at me with the same expression Harold used to have when I showed too much kindness to people who'd hurt me. Mrs. Chen, I understand your maternal instincts, but these aren't just personal crimes. Michael was planning to defraud dozens of innocent people using your identity. Lisa corrupted medical professionals and legal systems that other seniors depend on for protection. He was right, of course. My children's crimes had victims beyond just me. Michael's fake investments would have destroyed retirement savings for elderly couples like Harold and me. Lisa's medical fraud had corrupted doctors and judges who were supposed to protect vulnerable seniors. If you show them mercy, they don't deserve, David continued. You're enabling them to hurt other families the way they hurt you. That afternoon, Eleanor and I sat in my garden discussing the moral complexity of my situation. The late October sun was warm on our faces, and the peace of my reclaimed home felt precious after months of fear and uncertainty. Margaret, you raised your children to know right from wrong, Eleanor said. What they chose to do with that knowledge was their decision, not yours. But how did I fail them so badly that they could rationalize stealing from their own mother? You didn't fail them. You succeeded too well. You gave them everything they wanted, bailed them out of every problem, and taught them that your resources were always available to solve their mistakes. Eleanor was right. I'd been so generous over the years, so willing to help with every financial crisis, that my children had come to see my money as theirs by right rather than mine by effort. Maybe, Eleanor continued, the kindest thing you can do now is let them face the consequences of their choices. Real love sometimes requires allowing people to experience the results of their actions. As I sat in my garden that evening, watching the sunset paint my reclaimed home in golden light, I realized that the web my children had woven had caught them more completely than it had ever caught me. They'd lost their freedom, their reputation, their family relationships, and their futures. I'd lost my illusions about them, but I'd gained something more valuable. The knowledge that I was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than anyone had given me credit for. Tomorrow, David would file the final paperwork to recover my stolen assets and ensure that my children faced justice for their crimes. Tonight, I would mourn the family I thought I had and celebrate the woman I'd rediscovered in myself. Margaret Chen was nobody's victim, and she never would be again. Returning to my house after the court victory should have felt triumphant, but instead I discovered that Lisa and Michael had been treating my home as their personal property for months. With Eleanor and 2 police officers as witnesses, I used my own key to enter what should have been my sanctuary, only to find evidence of a violation that went beyond financial theft. The first shock was in the living room, where my carefully arranged furniture had been rearranged to accommodate a large gaming console and surround sound system that didn't belong to me. Harold's reading chair, the one I'd preserved exactly as he'd left it, now faced a massive television that dominated the wall where our wedding photos used to hang. Mrs. Chen, Officer Rodriguez said gently, take your time and tell us what doesn't belong. I walked through my own home like a crime scene investigator, cataloging the invasion. Michael's expensive computer equipment occupied Harold's study. Sarah's designer clothes filled my guest room closet. Lisa's personal items were scattered throughout the main bedroom, including prescription bottles and financial documents that suggested she'd been living here regularly. They've been using my house as a crash pad, I told Eleanor, my voice shaking with anger. This isn't their home, but they've been treating it like their personal resort. In the kitchen, I found evidence that cut even deeper. The refrigerator was stocked with expensive foods I'd never purchased. Imported cheeses, premium wines, organic produce that cost more than my usual monthly grocery budget. But these weren't just personal luxuries. I found catering receipts and party planning notes indicating they'd been hosting social events in my home. Look at this, Eleanor said, holding up a printed email from Lisa's account. She invited 20 people to a housewarming party here last month. The email described my home as Lisa's new place and invited friends to celebrate her fresh start after Mom moved to assisted living. She'd been telling people I was already in a nursing home while she was living in my house and spending my money on entertainment. Officer Martinez found something even more disturbing in the basement. Boxes of my personal belongings, carefully packed and labeled for storage. My photo albums, Harold's books, my grandmother's china, and dozens of sentimental items had been systematically removed from the house and prepared for disposal. They were erasing you, Eleanor said, tears in her eyes as she looked through the boxes. They wanted to eliminate every trace of your life here. But they'd kept the valuable items. Harold's coin collection was missing from his study. My mother's. Jewelry was gone from the bedroom safe. The antique furniture we'd collected over 30 years of marriage had been replaced with modern pieces that looked expensive but had no sentimental value. The most painful discovery was in Harold's study, where I found a real estate appraisal dated 3 weeks earlier. Lisa had hired a professional appraiser to value my home, and the report recommended staging improvements to maximize sale price. They'd been redecorating my house to make it more appealing to potential buyers. Mrs. Chen, Officer Rodriguez said, consulting his notepad, "We need to document everything that's been taken or altered. This is evidence of burglary and home invasion, even if they had keys." I started making a list, but the violations seemed endless. They'd thrown away Harold's favorite coffee mug and replaced it with a fancy espresso machine. They'd moved his reading lamp to make room for their entertainment center. They'd even changed the locks on Harold's workshop in the garage, turning it into storage space for Michael's failed business inventory. "Why would they change the locks on the workshop?" Eleanor asked. I had a terrible suspicion. Harold had kept his most valuable tools and equipment in that workshop, including vintage woodworking machinery that was worth thousands of dollars. If they'd locked me out of my own garage, it was probably because they'd already sold everything inside. Officer Martinez managed to force the workshop door open, revealing an empty space where Harold's life's work had once been organized with engineer's precision. 40 years of accumulated tools, reference books, and project materials had vanished, leaving only empty workbenches and dust patterns where his equipment had stood. "They sold his tools," I whispered, sinking onto Harold's old work stool. "They sold everything he cared about." Harold had been passionate about woodworking, spending evenings and weekends in this shop, creating furniture for our home and gifts for our family. His tools weren't just valuable, they were extensions of his creativity, his legacy, his love for making beautiful things with his hands. Eleanor found the sales receipts in Michael's business files. Harold's workshop contents had been sold to a dealer for $12,000, with the money deposited into one of Michael's fake business accounts. They'd liquidated my husband's memory for gambling money and failed investments. "Mrs. Chen," Officer Rodriguez said carefully, "I know this is overwhelming, but we need to finish documenting everything. The more evidence we gather, the stronger the criminal case becomes." I forced myself to continue the inventory, discovering violation after violation. They'd been renting out my guest room on Airbnb, using my address and utilities to generate income they pocketed. They'd changed my internet and cable accounts to premium packages that cost 3 times my usual bills. They'd even been charging Michael's business clients for meeting space in what they advertised as executive offices. The final insult was in my bedroom, where I found Lisa's vision board, a collection of photos and magazine clippings representing her future goals. The centerpiece was a picture of my house with notes about renovation plans and decorating ideas. She'd been fantasizing about making my home permanently hers. "She was planning to keep living here after you were institutionalized," Eleanor observed. "This wasn't just about money, it was about stealing your entire life." As the officers finished their documentation, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd found those forged power of attorney papers weeks earlier, and tried to process the magnitude of my children's betrayal. They hadn't just tried to steal my assets. They'd tried to erase my existence and replace it with their own version of my life. But now the house was truly mine again. The locks had been changed, again, this time with keys that only I controlled. The police had removed Michael and Sarah's belongings, and Lisa's personal items would be returned to her through her attorney. The furniture could be replaced, the missing items could be mourned, and the violated spaces could be reclaimed. "Margaret," Eleanor said, as we watched the police car pull away, "how do you feel about being home?" I looked around my kitchen, seeing past the evidence of invasion to the foundation Harold and I had built together. This house had been our dream, our sanctuary, our investment in a future we'd planned to share forever. My children had tried to steal that dream, but they'd failed. I feel like I'm home, I said finally. Really home. Maybe for the first time since Harold died. Because now I knew something I hadn't understood before. Home isn't just a building or a collection of possessions. Home is the place where you have the freedom to be yourself, make your own decisions, and live according to your own values. For months, my children had been systematically destroying that freedom. Now, standing in my reclaimed kitchen with my chosen family, Eleanor, David, and the community of people who'd helped me fight back, I understood that home was something no one could steal from me. They could take my furniture, sell my belongings, and violate my space, but they couldn't take my identity, my autonomy, or my right to determine my own future. Margaret Chen was home to stay. 3 days after reclaiming my house, Lisa and Michael showed up at my front door together. The first time I'd seen them since the courthouse. David had advised me never to meet with them alone, so Eleanor sat beside me at my kitchen table while I activated the small recording device he'd given me for situations exactly like this. "Mom," Lisa began, her voice smaller than I'd heard it since she was a child. "We need to talk." "The restraining order prohibits you from being here," I said calmly. "You're violating a court order by coming to my house." "Please," Michael said. "Just 5 minutes. We're family." "Mom," Lisa said, "we're begging you. We'll pay back every penny. We'll get counseling. We'll do whatever it takes to make this right. But please don't let us go to prison. Think about Emma. She needs her mother." "I am thinking about Emma," I said firmly. "I'm thinking about what kind of mother she'll have if you don't face consequences for your actions. I'm thinking about what you'll teach her about integrity, responsibility, and respect for other people. You're going to destroy our family over money?" Michael asked, his voice turning angry. "I'm not destroying our family, Michael. You destroyed our family when you decided to treat me like a mark in your criminal scheme instead of your mother. We made mistakes." "You made choices," I interrupted. "Calculated, deliberate choices over a period of months. You chose to forge my signature. You chose to bribe a doctor. You chose to steal my money. You chose to plan my imprisonment. These weren't mistakes. They were crimes." Lisa looked up at me with desperate eyes. "What do you want from us? What can we do to fix this? You can accept responsibility for what you've done without trying to minimize it or justify it. You can cooperate with the authorities to help them. Understand how seniors get exploited by their own families. And you can use your prison time to become the kind of people your father and I tried to raise." "Prison time?" Michael said. "Mom, we're talking about years of our lives. We're talking about losing our homes, our jobs, our futures. You should have thought about that before you tried to steal mine." The conversation continued for another hour, with Lisa and Michael alternating between apologies, justifications, and threats. They warned me that prosecution would ruin their children's lives, destroy their careers, and tear apart what remained of our family relationships. "You're being vindictive," Michael finally said. "This isn't about justice. This is about revenge." "No, Michael," I replied calmly. "Revenge would be me doing to you what you tried to do to me. Revenge would be me forging documents to have you declared incompetent, stealing your money, and having you committed to institutions against your will." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "Justice is allowing the legal system to hold you accountable for your crimes. Justice is making sure other families don't go through what you put me through." "We'll fight the charges," Lisa said, as they prepared to leave. "We'll tell the court this was all a misunderstanding, that you were having cognitive problems and misinterpreted our help." "You can try," I said, "but remember, I have recordings of our conversations, computer forensics proving your fraud, bank records documenting your theft, and testimony from medical professionals confirming my mental competence. Your lies worked when I was isolated and confused. They won't work now that I have allies and evidence." After they left, Eleanor and I sat in silence for several minutes. I felt emotionally drained but also strangely relieved. For months I'd been questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I was the problem. Now I'd heard my children admit to their crimes in their own words. "How do you feel?" Eleanor asked. "Sad," I said honestly. They're still my children, and I still love them. But I also feel clear about what needs to happen next, which is they need to face the consequences of their choices. Not because I'm angry, but because that's the only way they'll learn to make better choices in the future. I looked around my kitchen, my real kitchen, not the one they'd redecorated for their own purposes, and felt grateful for the peace that comes with moral clarity. Tomorrow, David would file the final paperwork to ensure my children face trial for their crimes. Tonight, I would grieve for the family I'd lost and celebrate the strength I'd found. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable the people you love to keep hurting themselves and others. 6 months after that final confrontation in my kitchen, I sat in the same King County courthouse where I'd won my freedom, this time watching my children receive their sentences. The intervening months had been a whirlwind of depositions, plea negotiations, and media attention that I'd never wanted but had reluctantly accepted as necessary. Judge Harrison presided over the sentencing hearing with the same stern fairness she'd shown during my competency case. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and advocates for elder rights who'd been following what the media had dubbed the Chen family fraud case. David sat beside me as we listened to the prosecutor outline the full scope of my children's crimes. The investigation had revealed even more victims than we'd initially known. Michael's fake consulting firm had defrauded 12 investors out of over $2 million, while Lisa's medical fraud scheme had corrupted 2 other doctors and affected at least 6 additional families. Your Honor, Assistant District Attorney Patricia Wells said, this case represents one of the most comprehensive elder abuse schemes we've prosecuted. The defendants didn't just steal from Mrs. Chen, they systematically dismantled her autonomy, her dignity, and her fundamental right to control her own life. Michael's sentencing came first. His attorney had negotiated a plea deal that required him to testify against his co-conspirators in exchange for a reduced sentence, but the judge wasn't feeling merciful. Mr. Chen, Judge Harrison said, you exploited your mother's trust, your position as her son, and your knowledge of financial systems to commit crimes that affected dozens of innocent people. Your actions weren't impulsive mistakes. They were calculated criminal enterprises that required months of planning and execution. She sentenced Michael to 8 years in federal prison, with restitution requirements that would follow him for the rest of his life. His business assets would be liquidated to compensate his fraud victims, and he'd be prohibited from engaging in any investment activities for 10 years after his release. Sarah, who had cooperated extensively with investigators, received 3 years probation and mandatory gambling addiction treatment. Her testimony had helped prosecutors understand how financial desperation could lead ordinary people to participate in elder abuse schemes. Lisa's sentencing was more complex because of her role in the medical fraud conspiracy. Dr. Patterson had already been sentenced to 6 years and lost his medical license permanently. 2 other physicians who'd participated in similar schemes were facing their own criminal charges. Ms. Patterson, Judge Harrison said, you violated one of the most fundamental relationships in human society, the bond between parent and child. You used your mother's love and trust as weapons against her, manipulating her emotional vulnerability to facilitate financial crimes. Lisa stood at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled, looking nothing like the confident woman who'd tried to have me declared incompetent less than a year earlier. She'd already served 4 months in county jail awaiting sentencing, and the experience had clearly changed her. I want to address Mrs. Chen directly, Lisa said, when given the opportunity to speak. Mom, I know I can never undo what I did to you. I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough. But I need you to know that I understand now how wrong I was, not just legally but morally. She paused, tears streaming down her face. I convinced myself I was helping you, but I was really just helping myself. I used your generosity against you, and I betrayed everything you and Dad taught me about integrity and respect. Judge Harrison sentenced Lisa to 4 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years if she completed financial fraud counseling and made full restitution to all victims. The court recognizes Ms. Patterson's cooperation and apparent remorse, the judge said, But the severity of her crimes and their impact on vulnerable seniors requires substantial punishment. After the sentencing, David and I met with the victims' rights coordinator to discuss the restitution process. The court had ordered full repayment of my stolen funds, plus interest and damages. Michael's seized assets would cover about half the amount, with the remainder to be paid through garnished wages after his release from prison. Mrs. Chen, the coordinator explained, you'll receive regular payments over the next 10 to 15 years as your children work to repay their debts to you and other victims. But the financial restitution wasn't what mattered most to me. What mattered was the precedent we'd set for other families facing similar situations. David, I said as we left the courthouse, tell me about the legislative changes. The Chen family fraud case had sparked statewide discussions about elder protection laws. David had testified before the state legislature about gaps in the guardianship system that allowed adult children to exploit their parents with minimal oversight. The Margaret Chen Protection Act passed last month, David said with satisfaction. It requires independent psychological evaluations for all guardianship petitions, mandatory waiting periods before asset transfers, and enhanced criminal penalties for family members who exploit elderly relatives. The law also established new protocols for banks, medical providers, and legal professionals to identify and report suspected elder abuse. Dr. Patterson's ability to create false medical records had exposed how easily the healthcare system could be manipulated by determined criminals. Eleanor, who'd been my constant companion throughout the legal proceedings, joined us for lunch at a quiet restaurant near the courthouse. We'd developed a tradition of celebrating legal victories with comfort food and honest conversation. How do you feel about the sentences? Eleanor asked. Sad but satisfied, I said honestly. I didn't want my children to go to prison, but I wanted other families to be protected from what we experienced. The media attention had been intense, but ultimately positive. My story had inspired dozens of other elderly victims to report financial abuse by family members. Support groups had formed across the state for seniors dealing with exploitation by adult children. The hardest part, I continued, is knowing that Lisa and Michael's children will grow up with parents in prison. Emma's only 12 years old. This will affect her entire adolescence. But, Eleanor pointed out, she'll also grow up knowing that actions have consequences, that stealing is wrong even when family members do it, and that her grandmother was strong enough to protect herself when no one else would. Eleanor was right. Emma and Michael's son would learn difficult lessons about integrity and accountability, but those lessons might prevent them from making similar choices as adults. 6 months later, I received my first restitution payment, a modest amount that would continue monthly for years to come. More importantly, I received a letter from Lisa, written from her prison cell, that showed genuine understanding of her crimes and their impact. Mom, she wrote, I've been in counseling for 6 months. Now, learning about the psychology of financial abuse and the damage it causes to families. I understand now that what I did wasn't just theft. It was a form of emotional violence that attacked your sense of self-worth and independence. She continued, I know I can't undo the pain I caused you, but I want you to know that I'm using my time here to help other women understand how financial desperation can lead to criminal behavior. Maybe some good can come from the terrible choices I made. Lisa had become a peer counselor in the prison's financial literacy program, helping other inmates understand the legal and emotional consequences of economic crimes. Michael had enrolled in business ethics courses and was working toward a legitimate accounting certification that would help him find legal employment after his release. Their paths toward redemption would be long and difficult, but they were finally taking responsibility for their choices without trying to minimize or justify their actions. As I sat in my garden that evening, reading Lisa's letter by the light of Harold's old reading lamp, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Peace with my family situation. Justice had been served, not through revenge or vindictiveness, but through a legal system that held people accountable for their actions while providing opportunities for redemption and growth. My children were learning to be better people the hard way, but they were learning. Other families were protected by stronger laws, and I had rediscovered my own strength and independence. Sometimes, Eleanor had told me months earlier, The most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable the people you love to keep hurting themselves and others. She'd been right. And now, finally, we were all free to become the people we were meant to be. 1 year after my court victory, I stood in the law office of David Chen, who had become much more than my attorney, signing the documents that would establish the Harold and Margaret Chen Foundation for Elder Justice. The foundation would provide legal assistance to seniors facing financial exploitation by family members, fund research into elder abuse prevention, and support legislation protecting vulnerable older adults. Mrs. Chen, David said, reviewing the final paperwork. This foundation will help hundreds of families avoid what you experienced. The foundation's seed money came from an unexpected source, the sale of my house. After months of consideration, I decided that the memories of violation and betrayal were too strong for me to ever feel completely comfortable there again. Harold's dream home had become a crime scene, and I needed a fresh start. Eleanor and I had found a lovely condominium in a senior-friendly community just 10 minutes from downtown Seattle. The building had security, social activities, and a supportive community of residents who looked out for each other. More importantly, it felt like home in a way my violated house never could again. "Are you sure about the foundation's mission statement?" David asked, pointing to the document's key paragraph. I read it aloud. "The Harold and Margaret Chen Foundation believes that every senior citizen deserves to live with dignity, independence, and freedom from exploitation by those they trust most. We provide legal advocacy, educational resources, and legislative support to protect elderly Americans from financial abuse, particularly crimes committed by family members." "I'm sure," I said, signing my name with the same confidence I'd shown in court a year earlier. The foundation's first initiative was already underway, a partnership with the Washington State Attorney General's office to create educational materials for seniors about recognizing and reporting financial abuse. Eleanor had volunteered to help develop the curriculum, drawing on her teaching background and our shared experience. "You know," Eleanor said as we left David's office, "a year ago, you were questioning your own sanity. Now you're creating a legacy that will protect thousands of people." She was right about the transformation. The Margaret Chen who'd discovered that real estate listing online was a very different person from the Margaret Chen who was now a nationally recognized advocate for elder rights. The experience had revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed and clarified values I'd sometimes taken for granted. My new condominium was bright and comfortable, decorated with furniture I'd chosen myself rather than inherited or imposed by others. Harold's reading chair had made the move, along with our photo albums and his favorite books. The space felt like a collaboration between my past with Harold and my future as an independent woman. The best part of my new life was the relationships I'd built with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I owned. Eleanor remained my closest friend and daily companion. David had become like a son to me, the kind of honorable man I'd hoped my own children would become. The other residents in my building had welcomed me into their community with genuine warmth. 3 months after moving in, I received an unexpected visitor. Emma, now 13 and staying with her father while Lisa served her sentence, knocked on my door one Saturday afternoon with tears in her eyes and questions I'd been dreading. "Grandma Margaret," she said, "I need to understand what Mom did to you. Everyone keeps telling me she made mistakes, but no one will explain what really happened." I invited Emma into my living room and made her the hot chocolate Harold used to prepare when she was younger. Then, choosing my words carefully, I told her the truth about her mother's crimes, not to poison her against Lisa, but to help her understand the importance of honesty, integrity, and respecting other people's autonomy. "Your mother wasn't evil," I explained. "She was desperate and scared, and she made choices that hurt people she loved. But she's taking responsibility for those choices now, and she's working to become a better person." Emma listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about family, relationships, financial responsibility, and moral decision-making. She was clearly struggling to reconcile the mother she loved with the criminal behavior she couldn't understand. "Will you ever forgive her?" Emma asked. "I already have," I said honestly. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending. It wasn't serious. It means choosing not to let anger and resentment control my life." "But you still sent her to prison." I held her accountable for her actions. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that someone is family. Emma visited me monthly after that, and I watched her grow into a thoughtful young woman who understood that love and accountability weren't mutually exclusive. She volunteered at the Foundation's educational events, sharing her perspective as a family member affected by elder abuse. Michael's rehabilitation was progressing more slowly, but his letters from prison showed genuine remorse and commitment to making amends. He'd completed his GED and was working toward a bachelor's degree in social work, hoping to counsel other men about the dangers of financial desperation and criminal behavior. "Mom," he wrote in one letter, "I understand now that what I did to you was a form of violence. I attacked your dignity, your autonomy, and your sense of security in the world. I can't undo that damage, but I can dedicate my life to preventing other families from experiencing what we put you through." Lisa's transformation was more dramatic. Her work as a peer counselor had led to speaking engagements about white-collar crime and family financial abuse. She'd written several articles for legal journals about the psychology of adult children who exploit their parents, helping researchers understand the motivations behind these crimes. "I thought I was entitled to your money because I was struggling and you were comfortable," Lisa wrote in one of her published articles. "I convinced myself that taking your assets was financial planning rather than theft. The scariest part is how easily I rationalized criminal behavior when it served my immediate needs." Her insights were helping prosecutors and defense attorneys understand the complex dynamics of family financial abuse, leading to more effective interventions and rehabilitation programs. 2 years after my court victory, I was invited to speak at the National Conference on Elder Justice in Washington, D.C. Standing at the podium before an audience of attorneys, social workers, and advocates, I shared my story not as a victim, but as a survivor who'd found strength in the darkest period of her life. "The most important thing I learned," I told the audience, "is that dignity isn't something other people can take from you. It's something you can only surrender." My children tried to convince me I was incompetent, confused, and unable to manage my own life, but their lies couldn't change the truth about who I was. I concluded my speech with a message of hope. Every senior citizen facing exploitation by family members needs to know that you are not alone, you are not powerless, and you deserve to live with dignity and independence regardless of your age. There are people who will believe you, support you, and help you fight back. After the conference, Eleanor and I toured the monuments and museums of Washington, D.C., like the independent travelers we'd become. Our friendship had deepened through shared adversity, and we'd discovered that the later chapters of life could be just as adventurous and meaningful as the earlier ones. On our last evening in the Capitol, we sat in the hotel lounge reflecting on the journey that had brought us there. "Margaret," Eleanor said, "when this all started, you thought your life was ending. Now you're probably having more impact on the world than you ever did before." She was right. The foundation had already helped 37 families navigate elder abuse cases. The legislation we'd inspired had passed in 6 states. The educational materials we'd developed were being used by senior centers across the country. Most importantly, I'd discovered that my 70s could be a time of growth, purpose, and contribution rather than just decline and dependency. Harold would have been proud of the woman I'd become in his absence, strong enough to protect myself, wise enough to help others, and brave enough to start over when starting over seemed impossible. As I signed the final documents creating my revised will and testament, one that reflected my new values and relationships, I thought about the legacy I wanted to leave. My money would go to the foundation, to Emma's education, and to the people who'd stood by me when my own family had tried to destroy me. But my real legacy wouldn't be financial. It would be the example I'd set for other seniors facing family betrayal, the laws I'd helped change to protect vulnerable older adults, and the proof that 70-year-old women could be just as formidable as anyone when they decided to fight for their rights. I'd started this journey as a confused widow, questioning her own sanity. I was ending it as Margaret Chen, advocate, survivor, and living proof that it's never too late to discover who you really are when the people trying to define you finally get out of your way. The house that Harold built was gone, but the woman he'd loved and believed in was stronger than ever. And that, I realized, was the best tribute I could offer to our 35 years together and the independent life I was finally free to live.